So find the inverse using a graph, and here's a graph. And essentially, if I look at the domain of the function, what's the domain of the function in this particular instance? He starts where? At -2. So domain are the x values, and it includes -2. And he stops where? +2, right? So what I'm looking at is -2 to +2. And so that says this is what x is going to be. It includes, if I put it in inequality notation. And the range, and we can get the range of the function, that's easy enough. Those are the y values. And the y's start at -2. And if I go up, it stops at 1/2. So that says y is going to be greater than or equal to -2, but less than or equal to 1/2 because they're solid dots. Yes? Oh, yeah. That green stack right there. And we're on page 3. So that says if I got down here the range now, it's going to be -2 to 1/2. Now, if I'm going to find the inverse, what do I need to do? We flip x and y, right? So you're flipping the domain and the range. So that says if I'm finding the inverse, if I think about how this operates, I have x and y. F goes from x to y, and then the inverse returns it. So that says in order to find the inverse, you flip x and y, because the inverse brings y back to x. So that says if -2 goes to -2, then -2 returns to -2. Or interesting, if 2 goes to 1/2, then 1/2 returns to 2. So easy way to think about graphing this guy, and I'm going to move down here to the bottom. I'm going to set up a T-bar chart. And could you do this in your head? Yes. But I suggest, in particular on exams, the less you do in your head, the better off you are, because you can't trust your brain on an exam. I don't know how many exams you've gotten back, like me. I got back and I looked at the problem, and of course I got it wrong. And I looked to see what I did wrong, and I'm thinking, I actually did that? It's in my handwriting, so obviously I wrote that down. So it's better just to kind of be nice, very nice, precise, and clean going through on exams. Don't try to skip too many steps, because you can't trust this. You may be physically here, but your mind might be who knows where. So -2, -2. The next point they give you is 0, -1. The next point they give you is 1, 0. And the next point they give you is 2, 1/2. And I like it when it's this kind of a graph that's got no little curvy things in it, because it's hard if it's got a curve to try to estimate out what these x and y values to get a decent looking inverse. So if I want to then take a look at doing the inverse, now to the inverse, the y's are x's, and the x's are y's. But to the inverse, y's are x's. So that says -2 returns to -2. So I'm going now back this way. -1 returns to 0. 0 returns to 1. And 1/2 returns to 2. So those would be the coordinate points of the inverse. You just flip x and y. So now, if I take a look at the graph, -2 returns to -2. So here we go, negative 2 returns to negative 2. Negative 1 goes to 0. 0 goes to 1. And 1/2 goes to 2. And it's like when you were a kid, you did a dot to dot. So now we do a dot to dot. From left to right. And you can see he is essentially, if I were to fold, we talk about symmetry, he is symmetric to the line y equals x. So I fold across the line y equals x. The two graphs are on top of each other. So there's symmetry that's there. Now, what is the domain? And now we pretend this guy's not there. What's the domain of the inverse? He starts where? Negative 2 and ends at 1/2. So what you notice is this. He's going to start at negative 2 and stop at 1/2. And if I look at the range of the inverse starts at negative 2 and stops at 2. So everything flips. Now here's where you have to be super, 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 super careful. Because if I were to write this in inequality notation, this says that x is greater than or equal to negative 2, but less than or equal to 2. But I'm flipping x and y. This is x here. Because this is the domain of the inverse, and the domain of the inverse is always, in his viewpoint, those are his x's, because that's where he starts. Domain is where you start. Range is where you end up, but he starts there. So everything gets flipped, x and y gets flipped. Now why is that going to be important? Because when we start finding the inverse of these strange little rational functions, like 1 over x and x plus 2 divided by x minus 2. And if you remember, you have things called vertical and horizontal asymptotes. All x's and y's flip. So what's vertical to one is horizontal to the other.